Now, I'll tell you how I started creating outlines and how that evolved over time. And remember, it doesn't have to be an extensive outline, you just kind of need an idea of where you're going. But before smartphones, I would keep a pen and a piece of paper in my pocket everywhere I went. And I would write down ideas throughout the day. And when I got home, I would copy those ideas down into the outline on my computer, saved it, and this might go on for weeks. But it would slowly build a basic outline. These days, I just put my notes in my phone. And I've learned that the longer your story is going to be, the more detailed your outline needs to be. For all of my novels, my outlines were very simple, but the David and Goliath series that I'm writing right now, the outline is very detailed. It might become a trilogy, it might be a 5-part series, I'm not sure yet. But I want to make sure that the various characters are having very different experiences and living very different lives, and that they are intersecting at appropriate moments. And if that's my goal, it can't be disorganized at all. It has to be very detailed. I don't want young David being on the trade routes of that time period and having negotiations and having a good relationship with his dad, and then all the other characters in the story living a similar life. If this character has a great relationship with his dad, this character needs to have a horrible relationship with his parents, something like that. Well, what about the basic building blocks of an outline? Who, what, when, where, how. That's pretty much it. If you don't know that, you're not going to be able to write your outline or the first draft. You have to get those answers first. Who are the main characters? Where are they from? And what is their frame of reference? What's their point of view on the world? What kind of story do you want to tell? If it's David and Goliath, is it going to be like Gladiator? Or will it be more of a fantasy spin like Game of Thrones? If it's a movie, the same questions will apply, but you got to ask yourself, okay, well, if it's animation, is it going to be like Prince of Egypt? Or is it going to be like a Pixar movie? Will it be cute and funny, like most Pixar movies, or will it be a serious film like Prince of Egypt? When is the time and where is the place of the story? Because 1920s Alabama is very different than 2022 New York. How will the story unfold through the plot points? Is it going to be poetry or narrative? And if it's narrative, will there be a lot of dialogue or not? If you can have a sense of answers to these questions, you're pretty much ready to get started. So let's look at a simple idea that I started back in 2006. Here's what I knew in the year 2006 when I began my first draft of my first novel, The Mason Jar. And I'm going to read it to you. In 1999, Finn, a college student from a small town and farm in Tennessee, travels to Pepperdine University in Malibu, California to attend graduate school. There, he falls in love with a young woman, a debutante from high society Colorado Springs. He'll fall in love, and when it ends abruptly, he will have to find the answers to put things to rights. Put things to rights is a British slogan. It's something that I heard years ago and I like it. What came clear to me as I started writing The Mason Jar, it'll be a drama, an inspirational epic. Epic means a hero goes on a journey. It'll be written for people who have survived immense disappointment. My bachelor's degree is in counseling, and I'll implement words of wisdom for the readers. It'll bring hope to people who have experienced disappointment in life due to separation from loved ones. It'll have a redemptive ending, which will encourage readers to love again. And I'll use Nicholas Sparks' stories, Henry David Thoreau, movies and novels like Dances with Wolves, A River Runs Through It, and Legends of the Fall to inspire and guide me through its creation. And the reason I chose Dances with Wolves, A River Runs Through It, and Legends of the Fall is because those were my favorite films and novels in those days. And I knew that I would use those stories as inspiration to move others. And I released The Mason Jar in the year 2012, rewrote it, re-released it in 2014 after feedback from readers, because after all, it was my first novel and I didn't really know what I was doing. So if you can create a statement to kind of get an idea of what kind of story are you going to tell, you might can just start there and start writing your first draft. But let's dig a little bit deeper into creating the outline. If you're a planner, you'll find creating an outline liberating. If you're spontaneous, you'll find a brief outline liberating. But if you're not a planner and you are spontaneous, you will find a detailed outline to be very constricting, and that's okay, that's normal. Your outline doesn't have to be super detailed. It's whatever works for you. Your outline can change, and it will change as you write. You can write a detailed outline or you can write a brief one, which is what I usually do. Just do whatever you're comfortable with. Having a skeleton or an outline to kind of know where you're going will help you, especially with writer's block, because you already know where you're going to end up. We often get writer's block when we're not so quite sure what will happen next in the story. I know from personal experience, I didn't have an outline on my first novel, and it took me 4 or 5 times longer than what it should have. But that's how you learn. If you're driving from South Florida to Northern Alaska, you better have a pretty good idea of how you're going to get there. What roads are you going to take? What states are you going to go through? Where are you going to sleep? Where are you going to eat? How much is it going to cost? Better have a plan. You can change your mind along the way, but knowing a general idea of how you're going to get there is going to be necessary. Some writers don't like to think of an outline as excessive bullet points. They like to see it as a skeleton, which I can relate to. The skeleton is the plot and structure, and the rest of the story is the organs, muscles, fibers, and finally flesh. In creating your outline or your skeleton, think of these things: who, what, when, where, how, and then think of the word genre. Who is the character? What will be the major plot points? When is the time period? Where is it going to take place? How will the characters set out to accomplish these feats? And what genre are you writing in? In the end, the goal is to just keep the reader's attention or the audience's attention, if you're writing a screenplay. You want them to wonder, what's going to happen next? You want them to be invested in your characters and curious how this is going to unfold. I think the most important part is to get the first draft out on paper. Don't stop and try to make every sentence perfect. Just get it down. It'll never be perfect. Perfection, or the strive for perfection, is going to happen in the third draft. And the third is hopefully going to be your last draft. You don't want this taking years. Just get the first draft done. You will eliminate a lot of writer's block and fear and negative self-talk by doing that. The reason why most people never finish writing a book or a screenplay is they try to get that first draft perfect. And they get burned out. They get stuck. If you can get it on paper first, you can go through in your second draft and figure out what needs work. You'll see where you need to add more story, more explanations, go a little bit deeper, and you'll also know what stuff needs to be cut. Hindsight is 20/20. The second draft, that's where you kind of treat it like a wrinkled shirt where you're going to put the iron on it and try to get the wrinkles out. That's where you're tweaking and cutting paragraphs and putting them in a folder to be used for later, hopefully. I like a scraps folder. That way I'm not deleting stuff. I'm just saving it for later because I might use it years later. You never know. But I never delete. I just move it into a scraps folder. And that's also encouraging because the last thing I want to do is write 5 pages and 2 weeks later realize I don't need that and then delete it. That's discouraging. Really try to create your good story in the second draft, but don't fret over the grammar, the punctuation, the syntax. You can worry about that stuff in the third draft. The third draft is where you try to make it as perfect as possible before you start submitting it to an editor. And it'll change after the editing. I restructured a lot of my second novel, Alabama Irish, after giving it to a development editor. And she took it from a C to an A because she was right and I needed to change a lot. And we'll talk about all of that. We'll talk about the difference between a development editor and a copy editor and a proofreader. We'll get to all of it. But my process is 3 drafts and it took me years to get there. I like to try to wrap it up after number 3. Your journey will be different, just like it is from mine, just like it is from everybody's. There's no right way to do it. But I just know after writing 2 novels, you kind of start figuring out how to write. How long do you write when you sit down? Well, for everybody's different. Everybody's got different lives and different schedules. But I will tell you, you would be amazed at what you can accomplish in writing just 15 minutes a day. How long do you write for when you sit down? Well, that's up to you. There's no right or wrong way. But I will tell you, you will be amazed at what you can accomplish if you just write for 15 minutes a day. And I challenge you to do that for 1 week. Write 15 minutes a day, and you'll be amazed at what you've accomplished in 7 days. My third novel, Young Vines, that was written over a course of a couple of months, and all I did was 15 minutes a day. You wanna know why? Because I had a big boy job and I had to pay my bills. So how do you be original in a world where every story has already been told? Well, the voice that you write in will be authentic and original because it's yours and nobody else's. Your observations and experiences in life are not going to be identical to anybody else's. So as you write from what you know and you do it in your own voice, that's where the originality and authenticity will come from. Now, I mentioned genre study earlier. And the reason why you need to know your genre very well is because there are certain subconscious expectations that an audience of that genre is going to have for your story. If you want to write a great law legal thriller, that means you're going to have to sell your book to that audience. And if you hadn't read the bestsellers in that genre, books by John Grisham and James Patterson, you're going to struggle. You have to be more of a student than a teacher. Lovers of that genre will read your book and love to point out your mistakes on the internet. And a lot of platforms are not going to erase vicious reviews. unless the character is being attacked. And most bad reviews have no legitimacy other than the reader's opinion. But I understand once a bad review is published, it's there forever. And I would say after my first few novels, I kind of got deaf to the reviews that were really negative. The most negative ones are the loudest, but they don't outweigh the positive reviews. It just feels like they do. You'll also want to think of the books and movies that are telling a story similar to yours. Go watch them, go read them. Find the ones that were widely successful. Those are the universal stories that are connecting with people no matter where they're from. No matter what time period they lived in, no matter what country they lived in, they enjoyed those stories. When you read and watch, ask what made this story so impactful? What is it about this story that moved me? What made them successful? And use that as a learning experience. I know a famous writer who says he writes 25,000 words a day, but that might take you hours because you're stopping and doing research. So I don't like to think about word count. I don't want to be in a hurry and be like, oh, I need to wrap up this research because the day's gone by because my quota is 2,500 words. I don't want to put myself in that situation because if I do that, I'm just going to have to go back later and rewrite it, and I don't want to do that. So instead of me thinking of a word count, I try to think about the time I'm going to invest in the story in that day. And that's how I learned how powerful 15 minutes of concentrated work can be. Now, 15 minutes was my minimum. If I was on a stride and it was going great and it was flowing, yeah, 45 minutes, sure, if I've got the time. 2 hours, yeah, great. Sometimes it was just 15 minutes, but I made it a deal for myself that I would give it at least 15 minutes. I've also learned from experience that if I put in 1 hour of straight focused creativity, I get kind of tired. Now, right now, I'm working on that David and Goliath series, and I do it on 15 minutes a day. I actually wrote the outline in 2012, which was 10 years ago. But it's a long-term passion project of mine. I really want it to be kind of a life journey of mine, where that can be maybe a final contribution to the literature that's a very good one, hopefully. But I've got a good outline on the entire trilogy, if it turns out to be a trilogy. I've got a good solid draft on about half of it. And since it's historical fiction, I'm taking a lot of time studying that world. And that takes a lot of time. I've seen authors write one novel and then try to create a trilogy out of that. And in my experience, in my observation, it never works out well for them. The first novel is great, and then the second and third just slowly just go downhill. So what I want to do is I want to write all three at the same time and make all three of them equally good. Or it may be 5 or it may be 1. I don't know. I'll find out. But I do suggest that you do find a place and time to write. And the way that works will be different. When I first got started writing, I would do it at night. I would have decaf coffee. I'll put on some classical music. I would zone in and I would get it done. The sound of the classical music and the scent and the taste of the coffee put me in a certain mental state. And it was the end of the day, so all of the major components that I needed to accomplish that day were done, and I could have a clear mind to write. But now, I just need a quiet place. I don't need coffee, I don't need music. Just get me a quiet place. It doesn't matter what time of day it is. I sit down, get focused, and I just get it done. There's a lot of hype these days, to quit your job and go all in and burn the ships. That's not wise. That sounds like someone wanting to have content to push, to get some attention, to get more followers, to sell something. You need to be wise about your approach. Everything needs to be within reason. I have a full-time job and I write on the side, and I enjoy it. It keeps the pressure off. I don't have to write, I get to write. I don't have to write so that I can pay this bill and sell this piece. I don't have to worry about those things.